In this video, we're going to dive deep into the uiMessageBox and InputBox in Fusion 360 API. Hey everyone, this is Matt with Learn Everything About Design, and in this video, we're going to take a step out of doing a project, and we're going to specifically look at the uiMessageBox and InputBox functions in Fusion 360 API. And I think the main reason that we want to do this is because oftentimes API projects involve either telling the user something, having them select an option, or just getting input from them, whether it's a string or a number value. And we've already looked at this and we've used message boxes and input boxes in several of the other videos, but I think it's important that we just dedicate a video to this before we progress into more complex topics, things like dialog boxes in Fusion 360. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to start a new add-in, or a new script I should say. We're going to create a new one, and just like all the others, I'm going to put API at the top so it just sticks it at the top of my list, and I'm just going to call this one messageBoxes. We're going to create that, I'm going to hit enter, and then I'm going to edit. Now, of course, first thing that happens is we have to trust the author, and then I'm going to go ahead and maximize this. So when we're looking at the code that we get, we instantly get a UI message box that says hello script. And if you weren't aware, there's actually a lot more that we can do with the UI message box. So in this video specifically, we're going to talk about the 5 different types of UI message boxes. We're going to talk about the input box to get a value from the user. And we're going to do some conditional formatting, or we're going to use some if statements to figure out what to do based on the user's reaction. So first, I'm going to just go ahead and put a comment or a pound sign in front of this, and we don't need it, but I'm going to leave it there because again, this is the default program. And we're going to take a slight break and we're going to take a look at the help file. When we look at the Fusion 360 help file, which you can find the links to these 3 pages in the description, there are a couple of things that we need to think about. Now, when we do a UI message box in Fusion 360 API, we use the name or the variable that we create, UI, and that's going to be equal to user interface. But when we're looking for this in the Fusion 360 help, we need to actually look for user interface. So we have to go all the way down here and find user interface. And once we find that, there are a lot of different things that we can do with the user interface. Now, remember, a lot of things that we do in API, things like getting access to sketches or features, that happens at a deeper level in the object model. So we have to access things first like the document or the design. And then we have to drill down to things like features or sketches before we can do things like create a sketch line. When we're talking about the user interface, this is something that we can access very early on in the API. We don't have to drill down a bunch of levels to get access to certain things. So for here, you can see that user interface has things like the active command. So if you want to make a script that runs based off the current active command, let's say during a fillet, then you could use things like the UI active command. They have selections, the active workspace, the toolbar tabs and panels, and so on. But what we're interested in here specifically is input box and message box. So again, the 3 pages that we're going to be looking at, there are links in the description, so you don't have to go searching for this stuff. But it's always important that we understand where it is so we know how to find it ourselves. So now that we know where it is, we have got our user interface variable that we created, and it's attached to app.userInterface. And the app is the core application. So when we go through this and we're looking at the message box, we can see that it has 4 arguments. Now, these 4 arguments are not required. The only one that's required is really this first one, this text string. And it's not necessarily required, but it's something that we generally use a message box for because we're sending something to the user. But you can see there are multiple arguments here. Title, which is a string that displays at the top of the box, buttons, and we have an object here called messageBox buttons, and then icons. So each of these are optional arguments that we can use. And the messageBox button types I've got open here, but I'm going to right click and open this in a new tab so we can look at the icon types. So here you can see that we've got 5 different icon types. no icon type to be used, information icon type, critical icon type, warning icon type. So just based on using these values, 4, 2, 0, 1, or 3, will change the icon that we see on the message box. Same thing with the enumerator for the button types. When we look at this, we can use these optional arguments to just have an OK button, which is default. We can have OK cancel, retry cancel, yes, no, or yes, no cancel. And the trick to this is we need to think about what this actually means in the program. And when I say that is we are going to return a value, and we're going to return a value based on whether or not the user pressed a certain button. So for that, let's go back to the help file, and you can see the return value is dialog results. So if I right click on this and open that in a new tab, you can see here that dialog cancel will return a 1. Dialog error, a -1. Dialog no will return a 3. Dialog OK will return a 0, and yes will return a 2. Notice that 2 is yes or retry. And sometimes you'll notice that these return values will be covering multiple options. But just keep in mind that all of this information is easily available in the help file as long as we understand what we're looking at. So now that we have the basics here, let's go ahead and hop back into Fusion and try to apply some of this. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to type our own message box. So again, UI.messageBox. And here you'll notice as soon as we put the brackets, we get this pop-up, this dialog that tells us all of the different things that we can do. We have text, title, buttons, and icon. So we can use these optional arguments to change the way that our dialogues work. So in this first example, what we're going to do is just simply do the OKButtonType, which is default, but we're going to play around with the different icons so we can see what those mean. So we're just going to use the text that's going to describe which one we're using, which is the OKButtonType. So OKButtonType, and then what I'm going to do is put a comma, and here is where we have the title. Now, if you don't want to put a title, you can leave an empty string, but honestly, if you're coming this far, then you should go ahead and put something. So I'm just going to do OKButton, then we're going to do another comma, and here is where we get to the message box button types. Now remember that these are values. 0 is going to be the OK, 1 is going to be OK cancel, 2 is retry cancel, 3 is yes no, and 4 is yes no cancel. So we're just going to do the default 0. We're going to hit comma, and this is again an optional argument. We don't have to put all of these. We could simply stop at the string for the title and the string for the text. Those could be the only things that we put in here. But we do have these optional arguments. So let's go ahead and let's take a look at the different icons that we can use. In this case, what we have is a 0 for no icon, 1 is question type, 2 is information, 3 is warning, and 4 is critical. So I'm going to start with 4, and then I'm going to go ahead and put a comment after here just to tell me what each of them is. 0, no icon, 1 is going to be question, 2 is going to be info, 3 is going to be warning, and 4 is going to be critical. Now, remember, all that's in the help file, but since I'm only recording one screen, it's a bit harder for us to go back and forth. So let's go ahead and save this, let's hop back into Fusion, and let's run it. So remember, we're doing our API message boxes. We're going to run, and you can see here that it gives me this critical icon. So OK button is the title, OKButtonType was our string or our text, and now we've got this red border here with the exclamation point. So let's go back into our code, and let's change this to a 3, which is a warning. We're going to set that at a 3, we're going to save it, hop back into Fusion, and we'll run it again. So again, API message boxes, now instead of being red, it's orange. So it's a warning, it's not critical. And let's go ahead and let's play with the other types as well. So 2 is going to be an information icon, 1 will be question, and 0 is no icon. So again, save, hop back to Fusion, and let's run it and see what it says. So here, now it's blue. So again, this one is information, it's blue. 3 was orange and it was warning, and 4 was red and it was critical. So the only other one that we have left is number 1, which is a question type. So let's go ahead and do 1, save it. And remember 0 is no icon, and that's going to be our default. So let's go back into Fusion. Let's run this one more time and see what it looks like. Okay, so now there's no color on the box, no extra icon type, and it's just going to be our information, right? So that is the very basics of sending a message box back, sending a message box just to the user. Now what we want to do is we want to explore the other types. So we're going to leave this in, and we're going to do a uiMessageBox, and I'm going to change the button type. So now we want to use a different button type. We have the OK. Let's go ahead and just bring back the help file so we can just remind ourselves here. So here we have the OK button, which is our default, OK cancel, retry cancel, yes, no, cancel. So we're going to go through all of these one at a time so we can explore them, but we're going to go ahead and move through one at a time. OK cancel button will be our next one. So let's go ahead and hop back into Fusion. And for simplicity's sake, I'm going to go ahead and put a comment in here so that way we don't have to keep going back and forth. So 0 is going to be OK. 1 is going to be OK cancel. 2 is going to be retry cancel. 3 is going to be yes, no. And 4 will be yes, no, cancel. Just kind of remind us what we have. So this first one is going to be OK cancel button. We're going to go through comma, and again, our title is the next thing we're going to do, and this is going to be just button types. We're going to go through next. This is going to be our message box types, and this is where we're going to enter the number 1. And for the icon, again, we don't really need to worry about the icons, but I'm going to go ahead and put icon number 2 just to make it different. Let's save this and let's take a look at what we made. So back here, again, we're going to run this, API message boxes. Our first one is just the OK. Second one, OK cancel button. Now here is where it gets interesting because we're not actually storing or returning any values, but at this stage, we can actually get information from the user depending on which button they click. So OK or cancel right now doesn't matter, it doesn't do anything. But if we go back to our script, what we can do is we can set a new variable equal to this, and that return, that number that's going to come back, will tell us exactly what they pressed. So here's where we're going to start in with our if statements, just to make sure that we understand the process with a basic 2-button option. So we're going to set this to OK button press, and that's equal to our uiMessageBox. So as soon as the user clicks something and returns that value, it's going to fill in that variable. Now we need to think about what's going to happen with that variable. Remember that there are some numbers that determine what the answer means. So before we go too much further, I'm going to go ahead and just put those in a comment as well. So 0 is OK. -1, that is going to be an unexpected error. 1 is going to be cancel. 2 is going to be yes or retry, depending on which button we're using, because sometimes it can be OK cancel retry. And 3 is going to be no. So at this point, we have our OK and our cancel, and we want to know if the user pressed OK or cancel. And the way that we can do that is either decide if both of those options matter or if just one of them matters. If one of them matters, then we can continue on to do something. If both matter and determine the flow of the program, then we need to know how to handle that. So I'm going to do an if statement. I'm going to check the condition of OK button press, and if it's one thing, then we'll go a certain direction. If it's another thing, we'll go another direction. So if OK button press, we're going to do 2 equal signs, is equal to, and we have to think about the number. So I don't care about the error at this point. We know that we don't have a yes, so the number 2 isn't going to matter. We don't actually have a no, we just have an OK or a cancel. So it's either going to be 0 for OK or 1 for cancel. If the OK button press is equal to 0, and then we need to put a colon, enter, and remember everything with the if statement is going to be tabbed in. So the tabs are going to be important. It's going to determine how we contain the rest of the program inside of there. Okay, so remember that OK button press 0 is OK. So now we're just going to say uiMessageBox, and we're just going to tell the user what they pressed. And that's really just because we don't have a program that's actually doing anything, so we're just going to sort of tell them what they did. We're just going to say you pressed OK. And then at this stage in the game, we can have an else statement. And the else statement is going to determine what happens with the rest of the program. Now, there are actually two ways that we can handle this. There's probably multiple ways, but two main ways. So if we put in the term return, that return is going to basically allow us to end what we did. So after this, in the same vertical position as the if statement, I'm going to put a uiMessageBox, and this one is going to say that you pressed cancel. All right, so we need to think about the flow of the program at this stage. So that first uiMessageBox with the OK button, I'm going to comment out because honestly we don't really care about it. This one here is what we're essentially looking at. We're saying we're going to present the user with an OK cancel a message box. We're going to say if you press OK, we're going to go into this if statement. We're going to say if you pressed OK, which is the number 0, then we'll say you pressed OK and we'll hit return. Now the main thing that we want to look for here is that after we return or finish this if statement, we don't carry on and present them with you pressed cancel. That's going to be the critical bit of this. This is going to help us understand how to control the flow of the program based on that user's input. So let's save this. Let's go back into Fusion and let's go ahead and run this. So again, API message boxes, OK cancel. So at this stage, when we press OK, we should just completely finish the program after we tell the user they pressed OK. You pressed OK, and we don't get a message box that says you pressed cancel. So let's go ahead and run that one more time. API message boxes. This time we're going to press cancel, and it gives us the message box, you pressed cancel, and we're done. So you need to let that sink in a little bit because that's going to be an important aspect on controlling the program. We essentially said, if you pressed OK, do all of the stuff inside of this if statement. And when that if statement is done, then return. Basically, we're just going to end the program. However, if that if statement does not turn out to be correct, if they happen to press cancel or any other button, then we're going to skip the if statement. We're going to skip everything that's in here, this message box and return, and we're going to move on to the rest of the program. So again, this is going to help us determine the flow of the program. Let's go ahead and explore this a little bit more. And I'm going to keep this same bit of code here, but I'm going to comment out my OK button press. And the reason I'm going to do that is because we're going to continue to just reuse this if statement, but we're going to change the variables as we go. So OK button press is equal to ui.messageBox. And this time what we're going to do is we're going to explore the next button type. Now remember, we put a little comment up here, but of course it's behind here. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at the next button type, which is going to be our retry cancel button. And that's going to be number 2. So this is going to be retry cancel button, comma, and then we're going to put our title, just button types again, comma, and then here is where we put the number. So remember last time 0 is going to be just an OK, number 1 is OK cancel, and number 2 is retry cancel. And also remember that the last argument for the icon type is also optional, so we can just stop here. And from our help file, we know that 0 is OK. So OK button press, you pressed OK, but this message box doesn't actually have an OK cancel. It has a retry and cancel. Retry, or yes, is the number 2. So we're going to change this number to a 2, and we're just going to simply tell them you pressed retry. And the other one is going to be cancel. So OK button press, if you have a number 2, you pressed retry, otherwise you pressed cancel. Let's save it and let's just test it out. All right, so now instead of OK and cancel, we've got retry and cancel. And if we press retry, the message box says you press retry, and we end the program using return. And then it would still hold true because we didn't change the second option. It's just going to be an if-else statement. So that right there is the basic flow of dealing with two options. But what if we introduce another option? Now, we do have a yes, no, and yes, no is going to be option 3, and we'll just change this here. And remember that yes or retry is the same. It's the number 2. So instead of retry, we'll just put yes, save it, and we'll go through, and then we'll look at the options for 3 different ones. So go into our add-ins, API, message boxes, and run. So retry, cancel, but. Yes, you pressed yes, okay. And again, we didn't change the text because it's just a 2-button option, and really there's really nothing different there besides it changes the yes to a retry. So now what we want to do is we want to think about what actually happens when we have 3 choices, and we need to know exactly what the user does or what the user presses. So we have a yes, no, cancel, and the yes, no, cancel presents the user with 3 different options. So this is going to be, instead of retry, cancel, it's going to be yes, no, cancel, and the number is going to be 4, and that's going to give us the option to have yes, no, and cancel buttons presented. I'm also going to go ahead and put icon type 3 on here just to make it look a little different. So now we need to return, or we need to think about 3 potential options coming back. So if the user presses yes, it's going to give us a 2. If the user presses no, it's going to give us a 3. If they press cancel, it'll give us a 1. So the first part of this still works fine. You pressed yes is okay. However, now we need to check 2 other numbers. So what we're going to do here is we're going to say ELIF, which is else if, OK, button press, equals, now remember 2 is yes, 3 is no. Then inside of here, we're going to do our uiMessageBox, same as before, and we're going to just say you pressed no. And then we're going to do a return here. And the cancel still holds true because what we're doing inside of here is we're essentially saying we're checking 2 for OK or yes, we're checking 3 for no, and then if they press cancel, that's really the only other option they have. Keep in mind that if, and else statements can go on for quite a while. So this could be else or else if. And the reason that it could be else or else if is we continue on with this statement, then we might want to do more else if statements afterwards. If we were checking conditions for more than 3 options, we might want to carry this on. So I'm going to go ahead and save it, and let's just check it. So back in Fusion, let's go ahead and go to API message boxes. Now we have 3 options: yes, no, and cancel. We already know that the yes part works, so if it's equal to 2, that's a yes. But no, you press no, and it exits the program. Let's try it again. Yes, you pressed yes, exits the program. And let's just check it for the 3rd option for cancel. You pressed cancel, everything's okay. So those are the basic message boxes, but hopefully you can see that with a little bit of extra work, we can check whether or not the user is pressing yes, no, or cancel. We can essentially present them with 3 options: retry, cancel, OK, cancel, just OK, yes, no, cancel. All of these are various options that we can use. We just have to pass the information back into a variable. In this case, we called it OKButtonPress. So OKButtonPress will store whether or not the user pressed OK, which is 0, cancel, which is 1, 2, which is yes or retry, 3, which is no. There's also that error option, that -1, which if you want to try to handle all the errors, you certainly can. That gets a bit deeper into programming knowledge, and that's just, we're not ready for that, so we're just kind of skimming over it. But error handling, or figuring out what to do if the program doesn't work, is going to be important. And that's what comes in by default, this except here. Anytime we've had a program that didn't work, it would pass back this, this module, this traceback, that gives us the information about what happened in the program. Okay, so now that we have yes, no, and cancel, we've got these three options. Let's start to talk about user input. And this is the input box that we've used it in the past. We used it when we were learning about user parameters, and we wanted the user to pass a value, and then we wanted to condition it into something. Now what we're going to do is we're going to present the user with an input box. We're going to ask them to input some value, and then we're going to check whether or not they did. So before all of our OK buttons, before any of this stuff happens, we're going to make a little space and we're going to ask the user for input first. So again, we need a value or a variable to hold what the user passes back. So what we're going to do is we're just going to call this one returnValue, and we're going to set that equal to UI.InputBox. And just like with the message box, the input box has various different options. We have a string, which is going to be the prompt. We're going to ask them for something, the title of the box, and then a default value. So what we're going to do is we're going to say user input box, enter a name. And then after that, we're going to make a title for the box, name input. And then we can have a default value. And this default value is going to be no name. And the reason that we're going to do that is just because we want to check against whether or not the user actually inputs something. So this is going to pop a box up for the user and they'll be able to type into it. Anything they type into that by default will be a string. But if you remember from previous video, what we get back is called a tuple. Now, this is going to contain the string or the information that the user is going to pass back, but it also contains a Boolean, basically a true or false. The true or false, or the return, is going to tell us whether or not the user entered a string or clicked cancel before the argument was able to test it. We're not going to be using the Boolean part of this, but we are going to be checking the string against what we set as the default value. So now what we're going to do is we're going to say if our return value, and inside of brackets, square brackets, we need to put the number 0. And the reason we need to do that is because this return value is a tuple. And the tuple inside of the brackets in the little pop-up here has a string, comma, and a Boolean. The string is the item 0. So that's that first part of that tuple. And if we want to pass the string back, we need it to be that return value brackets 0. So if that equals, and then inside of our quotes, no name, that's that default value that we passed, and then we need to put our colon here. So if the user does not enter anything and they just hit OK on that input box, then we're going to say uiMessageBox, we're going to prompt them with something, and we're just going to say too lazy ? So that just basically tells them, hey, you didn't enter anything. You're too lazy to do it. Are you sure? And then now we can go through and we can start to say, like, ask them, okay, cancel, retry, yes, no, whatever we want our UI message box to be. So at this point, again, this is where we can sort of, inside of this if statement, we can create another variable, create another message box, and ask them if they want to try again. We can use things like the retry cancel. So we'll use the number 2 for our optional argument. But we need to actually create another variable. So we're just going to call this one valid input. And we're going to say equals UI.messageBox. And then we need to ask them something. Do you want to try again? ? And then the title for this one is try again. And then our optional button type. Now that we're going to do a retry cancel, which is the number 2. So at this stage in the game, if the user didn't enter anything into the input box, then they would go into this if statement, which is checking against that no name default string. We're going to prompt them with a message box that says too lazy, and that's just an OK message box. Then we're going to present them with another message box that has a variable attached to it. So we're actually looking at their input, whether or not they pressed retry or cancel. And then we can jump into an if statement. So if valid input equals, we have to do it twice, if that is equal to the retry option. And the retry option is going to determine whether or not we do some other things. So if that equals 2, which is retry, then under this nested if statement, we are going to allow them to try again to enter a value. So at this stage, we would just give them the user input box again. And return value 2 is equal to UI.inputBox. And we could just copy this. I'm just going to go ahead and type it again. Enter a name, name input, and then I'll do, again, the default string. I'll just do no name. So now what we're doing is we're asking them for return value. I need to make sure that that 2 is right up next to that return value and there's no space. So now in this nested if statement, we've gone through the input box. We've determined that they didn't enter anything, and we've asked them if they want to try again. So if they want to try again at this stage, it goes into this if statement. Inside of here, what we're going to do is we're going to say, here's another input box. If you fill this in, your return value 2 is going to be whatever that new name is. So we have to remember that this again is a tuple. It's got that first position or 0 that is containing the string that we want. So now inside of here in this nested if statement, we've given them the option to enter a value again. I'm going to hit backspace, which brings me back in line. And then we're going to say else return value 2 is equal to return value. So now we have to think about the fact that inside of here, we're still inside of this main if statement here. We've checked to see if they entered a value, no name, which equals return value. If they didn't, we give them the option to go through and try again. We say, do you want to try again or no? So if they hit 2 and they retry, it'll come into this extra if statement, which is giving them the option to try again. If they choose cancel, it's going to go to this else statement, which says return value 2 equals return value. So all of this is happening based on this condition here, whether or not they chose to try again or no. So now at this stage, what we need to think about is what value we actually have from the user. So at this point, if the user entered a value, then we never even go into this statement, right? So in this if statement, it only is accounting for if they didn't enter a value, and then it asks them if they want to try again. So if they try again, then we send return value 2 to equal return value. But what's actually going to happen is if they enter a value, we need to account for that as well. So in this if statement, we're going to say else, and inside of here, what we're doing is we're accounting for the situation where they entered a name the first time. So what we're going to do is we're going to say else UI.messageBox, and we're going to pass return value. Again, it's a tuple, so we need to put 0 in there. And that's what we're passing if they entered a name. But where is the point where we pass a value if they didn't enter a name and they went back through? Well, so that needs to happen inside of this other if statement, right? So inside of this if statement, that's only accounting for if they didn't enter a name the first time, then we'll present them with the uiMessageBox, and this will be return value 2. Again, in brackets with a 0 because it's a tuple, we need to account for that. Okay, so at this point, we don't even really need this OK button. I'm going to go ahead and comment all this stuff out because I don't need it. Just go ahead and hide all of that and that as well. Let's save this and let's just do a quick check, and then we'll run back through the code to make sure we understand. So add in API message boxes, enter a name. So first, we're just going to enter a new name. We're just going to type in learn, say OK. We entered learn, program is done. Easy as that. But if we come back through and we don't enter a name, now it says too lazy question mark. Do you want to try again? If we hit cancel, it's going to save that no name. We say OK, program is done. And let's go to the third option. We don't enter a name, too lazy, we want to retry. Now we have another input box, learn to, and it gives us that information. So let's go back into the code and let's just take a look at it one more time. So the first thing that we do here is we ask the user to input a name. We give them a default value of no name, and then we check whether or not no name has actually changed. If they change the text, then it goes right to this else statement. It says, go ahead and display whatever string the user put into that first input box. If, however, they didn't change it and they just clicked OK, we say too lazy, and then we give them a message box where we're actually looking at what value they clicked, if they clicked retry or cancel. If they click retry, then we give them an input box. If they clicked cancel, then we just save that no name as the actual value. Now, the tricky part to this is what we're actually doing here is we've created two variables for the same thing. We've got returnValue 2 and returnValue. There are other ways that we could go through and we could reset returnValue. But for this example, I wanted to keep them separate so that way we could see what was happening with them throughout the program. I know that this is quite a lot, almost a 40-minute video on just message boxes and input boxes. But honestly, before you get to doing dialogues in Fusion or really working with the Fusion interface, message boxes and input boxes are a great way to test program functions, pass information back to the user, and even collect information about whether they clicked yes or no, or cancel or retry, or whatever the user has selected. You can have trigger different inputs in your program before we get into the nuances of creating things like dialogues and radio buttons and all those kinds of things. So at this stage, what I would suggest is you come up with a simple program. Now, it doesn't have to actually do anything in Fusion because, again, the interface is sort of exposed very early on. So you can just play around with the input boxes. But understanding the flow of the program based on the user input is going to be an important concept as you go through and create more complicated programs. So being able to do things like check whether or not they pressed a certain button on the message box and using that to control the flow of the program, whether it's through a user input or whether it's through just a yes/no cancel box. And being able to use those can really help you figure out how to make more complicated scripts that don't involve the dialog boxes directly in Fusion 360. If you have any questions about this, please let me know. As always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.